Jim, Joe, can I ask you to take the seats, please? Okay. Welcome back, everybody. We're now at our kind of final session, though we will have some time for deliberations. And this session fits on, I think, really well from the previous one, where we'll now look in this session to look at some of the alternative pathways that are in existence and are available versus coercive sanctions. So I'll introduce our panellists as we go through individually. So first up, Assistant Commissioner Justin Kelly from Garda Síochána, who will have presented us in the early first Assembly meeting, and I ask Assistant Commissioner to present to us again, please, just in the context of alternative pathways. Thank you, Justin.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I last addressed you in April, and it's a great privilege for me to be back to talk to you about the work of Garda Síochána in relation to the area of controlled drugs. As you may recall, in April, I outlined to you that we are your police force and that our functions are set out in the Garda Síochána Act of 2005. Our mission is to keep people safe, and one of our roles is to enforce the criminal legislation that the people of Ireland have entrusted our legislators to enact. This afternoon, my aim is to outline to you how Garda Síochána utilise the drugs legislation. Naturally, for your future considerations, it will be important to have a good understanding of the current system. I will firstly turn to our powers of search, which comes from Section 23 and Section 26 of the Misuse of Drugs Act. Section 23 allows us to stop and search people, but to do this, we must have reasonable cause to suspect that a person is in possession of controlled drugs. We must explain to that person why we are searching them, and if not in uniform, we must identify ourselves. We also use this power of search to search vehicles for drugs. Section 26 allows us to search premises, homes or businesses, for example. To do this, we must obtain a search warrant, usually from a judge. We must, of course, satisfy the judge that such a search is necessary. In some circumstances, we can obtain a search warrant from a peace commissioner, but it is normally from a judge we obtain such a warrant. I will now talk to you about drugs possession offences. Section 3 of the Misuse of Drugs Act outlines the actual offence, what is known as simple possession or possession for personal use. If we seize drugs that are for personal use, we will record this as a Section 3 incident on our computer system, which is known as Pulse. Our legislation outlines the penalties for those who are found in possession of controlled drugs in these circumstances. It is important to know that the legislation differentiates between cannabis and all other drugs. For cannabis possession, how it will work is that on your first offence, you will be able to avail of what is known as an adult caution, which will be given to you by a Garda inspector. This is not a criminal conviction. On your next offence, you will be prosecuted, but on conviction, one can only be fined. There is no potential of imprisonment. Again, for your next offence, a prosecution can only result in a fine at most. For your fourth offence, a judge can fine you and at their discretion impose a prison sentence up to a maximum of 12 months. This is the same for any subsequent conviction. Differently to cannabis, all other drugs are dealt with, as I set out for cannabis, on the fourth offence. So the judge will have an option to fine you or at their discretion impose a prison sentence up to a maximum of 12 months. So that's for all other drugs outside cannabis. However, the reality is very few people in our system are imprisoned for Section 3 offences. And this is something that I mentioned to you on the first day of the Citizens' Assembly. Our judiciary have a number of other options which are frequently used as alternatives to imprisonment. And Judge Ryan spoke of one of these this morning. In 2022, nationwide, we initiated approximately 11,000 Section 3 prosecutions. So that's 11,000. This resulted in 261 individuals receiving sentences of imprisonment or suspended terms of imprisonment. 261. Every one of these people had multiple previous convictions. In fact, the median number was 76 previous convictions. To be clear, not one of this 261 was a first-time offender. Many of these were convicted on the same day for other serious offences, along with the Section 3 offence. So I hope that this illustrates that in our current system, it is not the norm to be imprisoned for personal use drugs possession. It should also be noted that all children under 18 in relation to drugs possession are dealt with under our juvenile liaison scheme. And the point of that scheme is to divert children away from the criminal justice process. And it's a well-established system that we have in our organisation. I'll now move on to sale and supply. Possession for sale or supply is outlined in Section 15 of the Misuse of Drugs Act. If your case is dealt with in the district court, generally for smaller amounts of drugs for supply, a judge may give you a prison sentence up to 12 months and or a fine. Similarly, in the circuit court for larger amounts, you can receive a term of imprisonment up to life imprisonment and or a fine. However, the reality is sentences are far less than this. If the amount of drugs seized is over €13,000, the minimum sentence is 10 years under Section 15A of the Misuse of Drugs Act. However, in exceptional circumstances, if they are shown, this can be reduced, and it often is. The focus of all our drugs units around the country and on the Garda National Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau is on the sale and supply, not on possession. Our focus is on targeting those harming our community by supplying drugs. We set no targets or any metrics in relation to the possession offences. As you may recall, the first time I was here, I outlined that Garda Síochána is supportive of the current health-led approach, but has grave concerns around any potential legalisation of controlled drugs. These concerns are based on the implications for the whole of our society, not focusing just on those who consume drugs. My colleagues in North and South America have been very clear with me that legislation will not remove the influence of organised crime groups who will continue to maintain the illicit black market, undercutting legal prices and increasing strengths of drugs. My colleagues in Canada have told me that such changes have significantly curtailed their abilities to approach and engage with suspects. In British Columbia, the first month of legislation or legalisation saw a record number of overdose deaths. I have also been told that legislation will result in an increase in drug driving, something we hardly need here, given that last year we had almost 2,000 drug driving prosecutions. In relation to the Portuguese model, I recently went to Lisbon and met those involved in running the scheme and my police colleagues there. What was made very clear to me is that drugs remain illegal in Portugal. It was also emphasised to me that this was not decriminalisation, but is a diversion scheme. Possession of drugs in Portugal, as you may know, are dealt with as administrative offences and not an option not available in this jurisdiction. But this is an issue that you may explore further tomorrow. Finally, it was of interest to me that despite the number of country delegations who have visited Portugal and examined their model, not one have implemented it. On Garda Síochána, of course, support measures that can prevent drug deaths, such as the use of naloxone and supervised injecting facilities. We also fully support those who work in the drugs rehabilitation and recovery area and recognise the need for additional resourcing. However, as I said earlier, it is incumbent on us and on Garda Síochána to keep society safe as a whole and to protect the rights of the victims of crime. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you well in your deliberations.